She left the Billionaire CEO after losing her baby, but fate gave her triplets. The rain hammered against the hospital window at exactly 3:47 a.m. when Isabel Morgan made a decision that would cost her everything or save her from losing herself completely. Her hands moved to her empty stomach, the one that had carried life just 48 hours earlier. Gone. All of it. Gone. But here's what she didn't know. As she stared at that rain-soaked glass, 21 months later, she'd be standing in a pediatrician's parking lot with 3 screaming infants in her car, and the billionaire she'd divorced would be pulling into the space right next to her. Before I tell you this story, ask yourself this question and remember your answer. If you lost everything that mattered, would you have the courage to start over, or would you run back to what destroyed you? Keep that answer in your mind, because by the end of this journey, you might change it. In the next 12 minutes, you'll discover how one woman lost the love of her life and her first child in the same devastating week, only to be given triplets she never told him about. You'll understand why she made that impossible choice. And you'll witness the exact moment when $2.3 billion, 15 missed phone calls, and 547 days of silence collided in a moment that would rewrite both their futures. If you don't subscribe after hearing what happens next, you're basically saying second chances don't exist. Prove me wrong. Hit that button now. The sterile smell of antiseptic mixed with rain through the cracked window of room 347 at City Memorial Hospital. Fluorescent lights hummed at exactly 60 hertz. That specific frequency that makes time feel suspended, makes grief feel infinite. Isabel's hands trembled despite the IV still attached to her left arm, pumping fluids into a body that had just given everything and received nothing in return. Down the hall, she could hear other babies crying in the maternity ward, a sound that should have been her reality, but instead was a knife twisting in wounds that would never fully heal. She had named her Aria. The embroidered blankets were already at home in the nursery, pale pink thread spelling out a name that would never be called, never be whispered in the dark, never be shouted in joy. Isabel closed her eyes against the tears that wouldn't stop. Hadn't stopped since the doctor had said those words that split her life into before and after. I'm sorry. There's no heartbeat. The door opened. She knew without looking it was him. Expensive cologne, Tom Ford, oud wood, $370 per bottle, cutting through the antiseptic. The rustle of his wrinkled Armani suit, the one he'd worn on the plane from Singapore. The sound of his phone still in his hand. Because even now, even in this moment, Dante Castellano couldn't quite let go of the empire he'd built. Belle. His voice cracked on her name, and she wondered distantly if this was the first time she'd ever heard genuine emotion break through his carefully controlled businessman facade. She didn't turn around. Couldn't. If she looked at him, she might do something terrible, scream, hit him, collapse into his arms. She didn't know which would be worse. I've arranged the best grief counselor, Dante continued, and she could hear him moving closer, each footstep careful, like approaching a wounded animal. Doctor, Moreau specializes in pregnancy loss. She has a 93% success rate in helping couples navigate. Stop. The word came out flat, emotionless, more devastating than any scream. You can't fix this. If you're still watching, you already understand something. Most people miss some wounds can't be negotiated away with money and solutions. This next part is why you clicked on this video. Dante stopped moving. In the window's reflection, Isabel could see him standing there, phone finally lowered, one hand running through his dark hair in that gesture he always used when a deal was falling apart. But this wasn't a deal. This was their daughter. This was 12 hours of labor that ended in silence instead of cries. This was 48 hours of him being unreachable while she faced the worst moment of her life alone. Our daughter died while you were celebrating a $1 billion deal. Her voice was still flat, dead, but the words hit him like bullets. She watched his reflection flinch, watched him open his mouth to defend himself, watched the exact moment he realized there was no defense for this. The Singapore acquisition bell. It was the culmination of 3 years of work. I couldn't just answer your phone? Now she turned, and the look on his face told her everything. He'd aged years in the past 12 hours. His eyes were red-rimmed, his jaw shadowed with stubble, his $2,000 suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it on the plane. But he was here now, 12 hours too late, and that was the problem. That had always been the problem. I called you 15 times, Isabel continued, her voice gaining strength, gaining fury. 15. Do you know what I was thinking during call number 7? I was thinking, maybe he's in a dead zone. Call number 10? Maybe his phone died. Call number 12? Dante, that's when they were rushing me into emergency surgery. Call number 12. I was thinking maybe he's been in an accident. Maybe he's hurt. Maybe that's why the man who promised to always be there for me isn't answering. You probably already sensed where this is heading. You know what happens when two people speak different languages of love. But you weren't hurt, were you? You were fine. You were standing in the Four Seasons Singapore ballroom with 400 investors, closing your $847 million deal. And when I called, her voice broke finally, tears streaming down her face. When I called at 2:33 a.m. your time, you looked at your phone and declined it. You saw my name, you saw me calling in the middle of your presentation, and you made a choice. The words hung between them like smoke from a fire that had burned everything they'd built. Dante's face went white, then gray, and Isabel knew she was right. She'd spent the past 12 hours replaying every scenario, and somewhere around hour 8 she'd realized the truth. He hadn't missed her calls by accident. He'd chosen the deal over her, over Arya. He started, but what could he say? What words existed that could bridge the chasm that had opened between them? Get out, Isabel whispered. Get out, and take your grief counselor business cards and your solutions with you. This conversation would be their last real one for 547 days. She was already planning her escape, though she didn't know it yet. But to understand how they got here, to understand why Isabel would eventually make a decision that would deprive 3 babies of their father, you need to see what they had before. You need to understand what success costs when you're not paying attention to the price. 3 years earlier, the Amalfi Coast had been painted in golden hour sunlight when Isabel Morgan became Isabel Castellano. The scent of lemon trees and sea salt filled the air as 40 of their closest friends watched them exchange vows under olive branches that had witnessed centuries of promises. Isabel's custom Vera Wang dress, ivory silk that cost more than her parents' first car, caught the Mediterranean breeze. Dante's vows, written on hotel stationery at 2 a.m. the night before, had made her cry with their raw honesty. I promise to build an empire, he'd said, voice thick with emotion, but only so I can lay it at your feet. She should have paid more attention to which promise came first. Ask yourself this. How many times would you forgive someone for choosing work over you before you stopped forgiving altogether? Remember that number. If you're not subscribed yet, you're the reason creators hesitate to share these raw truths. Don't be that person. Subscribe now. They'd met 5 years before that perfect Amalfi wedding at a tech startup launch party in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn. Isabel was working as a corporate event planner, 26 years old, and convinced she had life figured out. Dante was 28, launching his 3rd startup after 2 moderate successes, and he spoke about changing the world with the kind of intensity that made you believe him, made you want to be part of his vision. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of late-night strategy sessions that turned romantic, of takeout containers and dreams spread across blueprints and business plans. Isabel found herself drawn not just to his ambition, but to the way he looked at her, like she was the only person in the room, even when the room was full of investors. The way he called her at 2 a.m. just to share an idea, knowing she'd understand. The way he said her name Belle like it meant something precious. The first year of marriage was building his company while she supported his vision, helping him navigate the social aspects of entrepreneurship, teaching him which investors to court and which to avoid. She was good at reading people, and he was good at executing plans, and together they were unstoppable. His startup, an AI platform for predictive analytics, took off faster than either of them expected. Year 2 brought their first missed anniversary. Dante was in Tokyo closing a deal with a Japanese conglomerate, and he'd sent her a necklace. Diamonds. Expensive. Impersonal. She'd worn it to dinner alone at the restaurant where he'd proposed, surrounded by couples who actually showed up for each other, and told herself it was temporary. Once the company stabilized, once they had enough, he'd come back to her fully. Every missed dinner was a brick in the wall that would eventually separate them. She told herself it was temporary, that once the company stabilized, he'd come back to her. She was wrong. Year 3 brought their second missed anniversary Frankfurt negotiations this time. and Isabel had stopped making excuses to friends about why her husband wasn't at birthday parties, gallery openings, or their own anniversary dinners. She'd started eating alone in their 47th floor penthouse, the city lights of Manhattan spread below her like a carpet of diamonds that meant nothing when you had no one to share them with. When she found out she was pregnant 8 weeks along, morning sickness hitting her like a freight train, she'd driven to his office in the financial district to tell him in person. She wanted to see his face, wanted to capture that moment when everything changed, when they became more than just husband and wife, but family. She found him on a conference call, door open, pacing behind his glass desk. When she appeared in the doorway, he'd looked up, smiled, held up one finger. 1 minute, the gesture said. Just give me 1 minute. She'd waited 27 minutes in his lobby, pregnancy test still in her purse, practicing what she'd say. When he finally called her in, apologizing, explaining it was London calling about the expansion, she'd told him, and he'd been happy, genuinely, completely happy. He'd kissed her, spun her around, called his assistant to cancel his afternoon. For 3 hours, they'd been them again, the couple from Brooklyn who dreamed together. Then his phone had rung. Berlin. Emergency. He'd taken the call. Most people would judge what happened next, but if you understand human nature, you already see the pattern forming. Love doesn't die all at once. It dies in pieces. The months of Isabel's pregnancy were a study in absence. Dante, at 8 weeks, promising to make every appointment, missing the first ultrasound because of a crisis in San Francisco, making the 12-week appointment, but taking calls throughout, so that when the tech showed them their baby's heartbeat for the first time, he was nodding at his phone screen instead of the monitor showing their daughter's lub-dub, lub-dub, lub-dub. At 20 weeks, when they were supposed to find out the sex, he was in Dubai. She went alone, recorded it on her phone, sent him the video. He'd responded 3 hours later. A girl, I'm the luckiest man alive. Love you. 7 words. 38 characters. That's what their daughter's gender reveal had been worth to him. But Isabel had told herself the same lie that millions of people tell themselves every day. It'll be different when the baby comes. He'll change. He'll have to. At 36 weeks pregnant, waddling and exhausted and preparing the nursery alone while Dante negotiated in Singapore, she'd gotten the call that every pregnant woman dreads: reduced fetal movement. Come in immediately. She'd driven herself to the hospital, calling him every few minutes, each call going to voicemail, each voicemail more desperate than the last. This is where everything collided. This is the moment that would define the next 2 years of their lives. The split screen of that day plays like a nightmare. On one side, Dante in the Singapore Four Seasons ballroom, crystal chandeliers reflecting off champagne glasses, 400 investors in custom suits applauding as he announced the $847 million acquisition that would make his company a global force. His speech about vision and validation and the future of technology, his phone in his pocket, set to silent because you don't interrupt the biggest moment of your career for anything. On the other side, Isabel, in the emergency room, harsh fluorescent lights making everything look too real, too sharp, the antiseptic smell, the cold examination table, her phone in her hand, 7 missed calls to Dante, each one more desperate. The blood pressure monitor beeping irregularly, 145/95, then 158/102, then 172/108. Numbers climbing like a countdown to disaster. 9:42 a.m. her time, 12:42 a.m. his time. First call. He's mid-presentation, explaining market penetration strategies to investors who control billions. Phone buzzes in pocket. Ignored. 10:15 a.m. her time. Cramping begins. She's alone in the waiting room, doubled over, trying not to scream. Second call. Straight to voicemail. He's turned it off completely now. If you've ever been let down by someone who promised to always be there, you understand what Isabel felt in that moment. 11:33 a.m. her time, 2:33 a.m. his time. They're rushing her into emergency assessment. The baby's heart rate is dropping. The doctor's face is grave. Third call. This one, Dante sees. He's at the after-party, celebrating with investors from 7 countries. His phone lights up with her name, her face from their wedding day smiling at him from the screen. He looks at it, looks at the investors watching him, toasting him, counting on him to be present for this victory they've all worked toward. He declines the call. That decline call at 2:33 a.m. would haunt Dante Castellano for the rest of his life. Isabel would never forget the moment she realized she was truly alone. At 1:47 p.m. her time, after hours of monitoring, after watching the baby's heartbeat on the screen grow slower, more irregular, after seeing the doctor's face cycle through concern, to worry, to devastation, they told her, "I'm sorry, there's no heartbeat." The silence after those words was the loudest thing Isabel had ever heard. Louder than the monitor's steady beep. Louder than her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Louder than the sound of her world ending. Labor was induced. Isabel spent 12 hours delivering a baby who would never take a breath, surrounded by nurses who wouldn't meet her eyes, in a room where celebration should have been happening, but instead, there was only grief. They gave her Aria to hold 4 pounds, 6 ounces, perfect in every way except for the breath that never came. She held her daughter for 47 minutes, memorizing her face, her tiny hands, the way she looked like she was just sleeping, just resting, like any moment she might open her eyes. Meanwhile, Dante finally checked his phone at 4:20 a.m. Singapore time, 1:20 p.m. her time, 15 missed calls, 8 voicemails, 3 texts from the hospital, and 1 from Isabel's emergency contact Margaret, their neighbor, that simply said, "You need to come home now." He booked the first flight, 14 hours in the air, watching his phone count down missed calls, listening to voicemails that started desperate and ended broken. "Dante, please, something's wrong. They're doing an ultrasound. Please call me back." Then, "Dante, they can't find the heartbeat. Please answer." Then, worst of all, silence. No more calls after 2:33 a.m., his time. She'd stopped trying. He arrived 12 hours after Aria was born and died. 12 hours after Isabel had held their daughter and said goodbye for both of them. He walked into that hospital room at 3:47 a.m. carrying guilt like a physical weight and found Isabel staring at the rain-soaked window with eyes that didn't recognize him anymore. Not subscribing after this moment means you're okay with missing stories that matter. Is that really who you are? Prove it. Subscribe. The 3 weeks after Aria's death were a masterclass in how 2 people can share a space but live in completely different worlds. Isabel moved into the guest bedroom on day 2. She couldn't bear to sleep next to him, couldn't bear his attempts to hold her, couldn't bear the way he whispered apologies into the dark like words could resurrect what was dead. The nursery stayed closed, door shut, handle untouched. But on day 8, at 2:47 a.m., when neither of them could sleep, Isabel found Dante standing in the hallway staring at that closed door like it held answers. She said nothing. He said nothing. They stood 5 feet apart, separated by grief that neither of them knew how to cross. The coffee maker ran at 5 a.m. every morning, neither of them sleeping, both pretending they didn't hear the other moving through the penthouse like ghosts haunting their own life. Dante's awkward attempts at connection flowers delivered daily from the most expensive florist in Manhattan, grief counselor business cards appearing on the kitchen counter, research articles about healing after loss, printed and left where she'd find them. Everything a solution, everything transactional, everything missing the point. On day 6, he announced his first post-loss business trip, Frankfurt. Just 48 hours, he promised. Emergency with the expansion. She'd nodded, said nothing, felt something inside her calcify into stone. On day 7 and 8, alone in the penthouse, she discovered an online support group for pregnancy loss. Women who understood, women who didn't try to fix her, or save her, or solve her, women who just sat with her in the grief. When Dante returned on day 9 with guilt gifts, a Birkin bag, Cartier jewelry, things that cost more than some people's cars, Isabel looked at him with eyes that had learned to see clearly. "You're trying to buy absolution," she said quietly, "but I'm not for sale." He'd flinched, like she'd struck him. Day 10 through 12 brought something unexpected. One night of desperate physical connection. Both of them breaking simultaneously, reaching for each other in the dark, not out of love, but out of need to feel something other than grief. Silent tears, clutching each other, trying to remember who they'd been before. It was grief sex, trauma bonding, 2 people drowning and grabbing onto anything solid. Neither knew that 3 lives began that night. You probably already figured out what's happening to her body while she's planning her escape, but she has no idea yet. This next part changes everything. Day 13, Dante announced another trip, Tokyo, 5 days, and Isabel felt something inside her snap. "Are you running from me or from what happened?" she asked, voice steady, eyes steady, everything steady except the marriage crumbling between them. His honest answer destroyed what little remained. "I don't know. Maybe both. I don't know how to fix this." "That's the problem," Isabel said softly. "You think everything can be fixed. You think there's a solution to grief, a strategy for healing, a deal to be made with God or fate or whatever controls these things. But some things are just broken, Dante. Some things stay broken." The next days were a blur of research. Isabel Googling fresh start after loss, leaving after miscarriage, starting over alone at 3 a.m. while Dante slept in the master bedroom, looking at cottages in coastal towns, small places, quiet places, places where nobody knew her as Dante Castellano's wife, where she could be just Isabel again, whoever that was. Day 19, he announced Frankfurt again. Another crisis. 3 days. She'd nodded, waited until he left for the airport. Then she packed. People who skip subscribing here usually regret it when they can't find this channel again. Don't be them. Click subscribe. Isabel packed light. 1 suitcase, her favorite clothes, her mother's jewelry, her grandmother's recipe book. She left behind the Birkin bags, the Cartier jewelry, the designer dresses that had been her uniform as Mrs. Castellano. She left behind the woman she'd been in that life. On the kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker that would run alone the next morning, she left a note. 1 sentence. "I need to find myself again. Please don't follow me. She didn't know Dante had come home early, had gotten on an earlier flight because he'd finally understood that he needed to choose her, needed to fight for what was left of them. Had bought tickets to the Amalfi Coast, planning to take her back to where they'd made promises under olive trees, thinking maybe they could remember who they'd been, maybe they could start healing. He found the note at 11:37 p.m. on day 21. Stood in their kitchen, his kitchen now. Just his with the Amalfi Coast plane tickets in one hand and her note in the other, finally understanding what loss actually meant. He'd lost Aria to his absence. Now, he'd lost Isabel too. And this time, he'd lost her not to tragedy, but to his own choices, and that was somehow worse. The weekend trip to Amalfi never happened. Instead, Dante stood in an empty penthouse holding a note, finally understanding what loss actually meant. Over the next 18 months, Dante would call 47 times in the first month alone. Each call would go to voicemail. Each voicemail would get more desperate, then more resigned, then finally would stop altogether. He would hire private investigators who would report back that she wanted to be left alone, that she was safe, that she'd made it clear any pursuit would result in restraining orders. He would sign divorce papers without contest, transferring money she wouldn't accept beyond the bare minimum. He would respect her wishes even though it destroyed him, because that's what you do when you love someone. You let them go when they ask you to, even when every fiber of your being screams to fight. But Isabel didn't know about any of that yet. On day 21, she drove out of Manhattan at midnight in her 10-year-old Honda Civic, everything she owned in the back seat, heading north toward a coastal town she'd found on a random internet search, a town called Ashford, population 3,200, known for its lighthouse and its quiet, perfect for disappearing. She had no idea that in 18 months, that quiet would explode. That in 18 months, fate would decide she'd had enough peace and would deliver chaos in the form of 3 heartbeats she didn't expect, 3 lives she didn't plan for, and 1 collision in a parking lot that would destroy the walls she'd so carefully built. If you're like me, you recognize that sometimes the only way forward is to burn everything down and start from ashes. Pay attention to what comes next. Ashford welcomed Isabel like a whisper instead of a shout. The cottage she rented for $350 a month had peeling blue paint and a porch that creaked when you walked on it. But it sat 2 blocks from the ocean and woke her every morning with the sound of waves instead of sirens. She cut her hair the first week, chopped it herself with kitchen scissors until it barely touched her shoulders, watching pieces of Mrs. Castellano fall into the sink. No makeup. Simple clothes from Target and thrift stores. She looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, which was exactly what she wanted. The bookstore appeared in week 3. A help wanted sign in the window of a place called Chapter and Verse. The owner was a 73-year-old woman named Margaret Chen with silver hair and a braid and eyes that saw too much. She hired Isabel within 5 minutes of conversation, asking no questions about where she'd come from or why she'd come, just handed her an apron and showed her how to work the ancient cash register. "You're running from something," Margaret had said on day 5, not looking up from the tea she was making chamomile, the smell filling the bookstore's worn wooden interior. "Everyone who comes to Ashford is either running from something or toward something. You'll figure out which soon enough." Isabel's days became routine in a way her life in Manhattan never had been. Open the bookstore at 8 a.m. Morning walk on the beach before the tourists arrived. Bare feet in sand. Breathing air that tasted like salt and freedom. The bookstore smelled like aged paper and Margaret's tea. Customers were locals who knew everyone's business, but had the small-town grace not to ask too many questions. Quiet evenings in her cottage, where she'd finally started sleeping through the night, around month 9. This is the part where most stories rush forward. But you deserve to understand who she became in those 18 months. Dante's attempts to reach her tapered off. 47 calls in month 1 became 20, in month 2 became 5, in month 3 became silence. The divorce papers arrived in month 4. She signed them without hesitation, refused his generous settlement beyond the bare minimum, wanting nothing from that life. The papers asked if she wanted to revert to her maiden name. She checked yes. Isabel Morgan again. Starting over. The healing process wasn't linear. Month 3 brought a stretch of good days where she laughed at a customer's joke about romance novel covers and realized it was her first genuine laugh since Aria. Month 5 brought a day where she couldn't get out of bed, couldn't stop crying, couldn't remember why breathing was supposed to be worth the effort. Month 7 brought the first full night of sleep without nightmares. Month 9 brought a morning when she realized she'd gone an entire day without thinking about what she'd lost. She attended the pregnancy loss support group for 6 months, then stopped when she realized she was ready to stop defining herself by grief. The cottage garden, initially neglected, became her project. She planted roses that wouldn't bloom until the next spring, which felt like hope caring about a future you haven't seen yet. Margaret became the mother figure Isabel's actual mother had never been. Over tea and between customers, she shared her own losses, a husband to cancer, a daughter to distance, and taught Isabel that healing wasn't forgetting, just learning to carry the weight differently. "You're like beach glass, dear," Margaret said one afternoon in month 11, both of them watching the ocean through the bookstore window. "The ocean's working on you, taking your sharp edges, making you smooth, but you're still glass, still yourself, just transformed." She was finally finding peace, and that's exactly when fate decided she was ready for chaos. Here's what you need to understand. Healing isn't a straight line. Isabel was better, not healed. There's a difference, and that difference would matter very soon. The cottage had 2 bedrooms. She never imagined she'd need that second one for what was coming. Subscribe now or comment below and explain to everyone why this story wasn't worth it. I'll wait. Month 18, day 12. A Tuesday morning. The bookstore smelled like the vanilla candle Margaret always lit at 10 a.m. Soft jazz playing from speakers older than Isabel. At exactly 10:47, the world tilted. Isabel was shelving new arrivals, a shipment of mystery novels, when dizziness hit her like a physical blow. She gripped the shelf, knuckles white, room spinning, Margaret's concerned face swimming into view. "Whoa there." Margaret's hands on her shoulders, steady, grounding. "When's the last time you saw a doctor?" "I'm fine," Isabel said automatically, but her mind was racing. When was the last time she'd seen a doctor? Not since. Not since the hospital. Not since Aria. 18 months of avoiding anything that reminded her of that night. "You're pale as milk and swaying like you're on a ship," Margaret said firmly. "Go home, rest, and for the love of God, see someone if this happens again." It happened again that night, and the next morning. By Thursday, Isabel couldn't ignore it anymore, but she also couldn't bring herself to go to a doctor. Doctors meant questions. Doctors meant medical history, Doctors meant explaining about Arya, and she'd built this new life specifically to avoid explaining. Instead, she drove to 3 different pharmacies, CVS in Ashford, Walgreens in the next town over, an independent pharmacy 20 miles away. Paranoid about small-town gossip, about someone seeing and asking questions. She bought pregnancy tests from each location, stuffing them in her purse like contraband. Friday evening, in her cottage bathroom with its cracked tile and old mirror, she took all 3 tests, then sat on the cold floor and watched 3 pink lines appear like accusations. Impossible. Except not impossible because math didn't lie. 18 months ago minus 40 weeks was the grief sex. Was night 10 through 12. Was the last time she'd been with Dante before everything ended. If this story doesn't make you subscribe, you might be the kind of person everyone warns others about. Prove you're not subscribed now. The emotional cascade hit her in waves. Terror, how could she raise a baby alone? Wonder, life, after death, after loss. Guilt, how could she bring life into the world when she couldn't keep Arya alive? Hope, dangerous, terrifying hope that maybe she was getting a second chance. Fear, what if she lost this one too? She sat on that bathroom floor until the tiles left imprints on her legs. 3 positive tests lined up like evidence. Trying to understand how her body had betrayed her or saved her, she didn't know which. A week later, after Margaret noticed the saltine crackers and the way Isabel disappeared to the bathroom 3 times in one morning, after Margaret's knowing look and gentle, "There's a good doctor in town, dear, Dr. Sarah Chen. She's discreet," Isabel made the appointment. Dr. Sarah Chen's office was small, professional, smelled like antiseptic in a way that made Isabel's hands shake. The intake forms asked about previous pregnancies. She wrote 1 in the box. In the box that asked about living children, her pen hovered before she wrote 0. The ultrasound room was too similar to memories she'd tried to bury. Cold gel on her stomach, the wand pressing, the screen at an angle where she could see if she wanted to or could avoid if she needed to. Dr. Chen was quiet, moving the wand slowly, carefully, and Isabel held her breath without meaning to. The silence stretched too long. Oh God, not again. Please, not again. Please don't make me survive this twice. "This is extraordinary, Doctor," Chen said finally, and there was wonder in her voice instead of sympathy, which was the first clue that everything was about to change. "You're carrying triplets." The word didn't make sense. Isabel's brain tried to process it and failed. "That's not possible." "It's rare," Dr. Chen agreed, adjusting the screen so Isabel could see. "Spontaneous triplets occur in approximately 1 in 10,000 pregnancies. But there they are. 3 strong heartbeats, 14 weeks along, all measuring perfectly. The screen showed them 3 small forms, 3 separate spaces, 3 distinct heartbeats, creating a symphony. Lub-dub, lub-dub, lub-dub. 3 lives where she'd expected 1. 3 chances where she'd expected to survive, just barely. "I need you to tell me about the father," Dr. Chen said gently. "Triplet pregnancies need excellent support systems. Is he involved?" "He's not in the picture," Isabel heard herself say, voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "And he's not going to be." "Stop and think. Would you tell the person who broke you that you're carrying their children? Or would you protect yourself at all costs? Your answer defines you." Dr. Chen's expression was carefully neutral. "That's your choice, of course. But triplets, Isabel, this is going to be incredibly challenging. Are you sure you want to do this alone?" "I can't survive losing him and another baby," Isabel said. And it was the truest thing she'd said in months. "So, I choose to lose just him. I choose to keep them." Her hands moved to her stomach, to the 3 lives she didn't know were there, to the 3 second chances fate had given her. "I can do this. I have to do this." The internal justification formed even as she spoke. Dante had made his choice. He'd chosen Singapore over her, over Arya, over their family. She was making her choice now. She was choosing these babies over him, over any risk of losing them if he disappointed her again, over the chance of surviving being broken a second time. Isabel thought she could keep this secret forever. She had exactly 19 more weeks before fate decided otherwise. Your finger is hovering over subscribe, but you won't click it. That hesitation is exactly why you keep missing opportunities in real life. Click now. The pregnancy journey was nothing like she'd imagined. At 5 months, she quit the bookstore, couldn't hide it anymore, her body transforming into something she barely recognized. Margaret hugged her, made her promise photos, secretly bought 3 sets of baby clothes, and left them on Isabel's porch with a note. Every grandchild should have something made with love. Consider me their fairy godmother. Money became tight. The cottage was cheap, but babies were expensive, and triplets exponentially more so. Isabel swallowed her pride and accepted slightly more from the divorce settlement, telling herself it wasn't for her, it was for them. Bought maternity clothes from donation centers. Attended prenatal appointments where Dr. Chen monitored the triplets closely, each visit ending with, "They're perfect. You're doing amazingly." She refused the baby shower the local mothers group wanted to throw. Too painful. Too much like hope. Too much like tempting fate after what happened with Aria. Instead, she sat alone in her cottage at night, knitting tiny clothes with hands that remembered doing this before, each stitch a prayer. Please let them live. Please let me be enough. Please let this story end differently. Naming them became her project. She needed names with meaning, names that honored what they represented. Luna Moon, light in darkness. Stella Stars, hope in night sky. Phoenix, rebirth from ashes. She whispered the names to her growing belly, introducing them to themselves before they were born. By month 7, she was waddling instead of walking. By month 8, she couldn't see her feet and needed Margaret's help getting groceries. At 34 weeks, 6 weeks early, but normal for triplets, her water broke at 3:27 a.m. during a trip to the bathroom. Her neighbor Robert drove her to the hospital, Margaret recovering from hip surgery and sobbing apologies on the phone. The delivery was controlled chaos, 3 warming beds ready, a team of nurses, Dr. Chen's calm voice guiding her through contractions that felt like being torn apart and remade simultaneously. Luna came first at 4:47 a.m. 4 pounds, 6 ounces, placed on Isabel's chest for 37 seconds of skin to skin before being whisked to assessment. A cry, sharp, angry, alive, Isabel sobbed. Phoenix came second at 4:53 a.m. 4 pounds, 2 ounces, the middle child. The loudest cry of the 3, a wail that made the nurses laugh. "This one's going to keep you busy," someone said, and Isabel thought, good, busy means alive. Stella came last at 4:57 a.m., 4 pounds, 8 ounces. The biggest, the calmest, barely crying, just looking around with dark eyes that seemed to take everything in. An observer. "Doctor," Chen said softly, handing her to Isabel. "She's going to be your quiet one." They were here. They were real. They were alive. 3 heartbeats that had been lub-dub inside her were now 3 separate people breathing on their own. Isabel held each one, memorizing faces, tiny hands, the way they looked like her and like Dante and like themselves. "You're here," she whispered to them. "You're real. You're alive. And I'm never letting anything hurt you." That promise would be tested sooner than she thought. That pediatrician appointment would change everything. She just didn't know it yet. In exactly 98 days, she would be standing in a parking lot, and secrets would explode. But first, she had to survive the first month of triplets. The first month with triplets was a blur that redefined every understanding Isabel had of exhaustion. Sleep became a myth, something other people experienced, while she existed in a permanent state of half-consciousness punctuated by crying, feeding, diaper changes, and more crying. Luna woke every 2 hours like clockwork. 2:17 a.m., 4:17 a.m., 6:17 a.m., precise as a Swiss watch. Stella was the easiest, sleeping in 3-hour stretches, eating efficiently, barely fussing. And then there was Phoenix. Phoenix cried. Not normal baby crying, the kind that started as a whimper and escalated to a scream that seemed to vibrate the cottage's windows. Colic. Dr. Chen had diagnosed at the 2-week checkup, but the word didn't capture the reality. It was 3 a.m. crying jags that lasted 4 hours. It was Isabel walking circles in the cottage, bouncing him, singing, pleading, crying herself, while Luna and Stella slept, and Phoenix screamed like he was being tortured. By week 3, Isabel was hallucinating from sleep deprivation, seeing shapes move in shadows, forgetting if she'd fed Luna or just dreamed it. Finding herself standing in the kitchen with no memory of why she'd walked there, Phoenix screaming in her arms. Her shirt, covered in spit-up that might have been from an hour ago or 3 days ago time, had lost all meaning. Margaret brought groceries twice a week, took one look at Isabel's face, and started doing more. Holding babies, so Isabel could shower. Folding the endless laundry. Making meals that Isabel ate cold at 3 a.m., one-handed while feeding someone. "You need help," Margaret said on day 23, and it wasn't a suggestion. "I can do this alone," Isabel said, the mantra she'd been repeating since the day she left Manhattan. "I have to." "Stubbornness isn't strength, dear," Margaret said gently. "It's just stubbornness." Day 27 brought the breaking point. Phoenix had been screaming for 72 hours with only brief breaks for exhausted sleep. Nothing worked. Not the anti-colic bottles. Not the special formula. Not the gas drops. Not the swing. Not the white noise. Not Isabel's increasingly desperate attempts at comfort. At 4:13 a.m., holding a red-faced screaming Phoenix while Luna stirred and Stella made the pre-cry sounds that meant she was about to wake up, Isabel called Dr. Chen's emergency line and sobbed into the phone. "Bring him in tomorrow, Doctor," Chen said immediately, her voice calm in a way that made Isabel cry harder. 9 a.m. "And Isabel, bring someone with you if you can. You sound like you're at your limit." "I have no one," Isabel said, and hearing it out loud made it true in a way it hadn't been before. She'd isolated herself so completely, cut herself off so thoroughly from her old life, that she was facing the hardest thing she'd ever done with nobody, by choice, her choice. "I can do this alone," she whispered to Phoenix at 5 a.m., his screams finally quieting to whimpers. "I can do this. I have to." But stubbornness, as Margaret said, wasn't strength. It was just stubbornness. And in exactly 14 hours, that distinction would matter more than she could possibly imagine. If you're still watching, you know something's about to collide. The question is whether either of them will survive it intact. Wednesday morning, 9:37 a.m. The Ashford Pediatric Associates parking lot was still wet from morning rain, puddles reflecting gray sky, and the few clouds breaking apart to reveal autumn sun. Isabel's 2015 Honda Civic rattled into a parking space, the engine making a sound that meant she needed an oil change she couldn't afford. In the back seat, 3 car seats, the kind that cost $29 each at Target, not the $300 designer versions held 3 4-month-old babies. Luna was awake, dark eyes studying the world with that serious expression she always had. Stella was sleeping, as usual, peaceful. And Phoenix had finally, mercifully, fallen asleep 17 minutes ago, his face still red and blotchy from the latest crying jag, but quiet, finally quiet. Isabel sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, breathing, just breathing. The appointment had gone well. Dr. Patel had recommendations, a new formula, a different feeding position, medication for the colic. Relief was coming. She could do this. She was doing this. She got out, opened the back door, started the careful choreography of unbuckling Phoenix without waking him. That's when she heard it, the sound of an expensive engine, the kind that purred instead of rattled, pulling into the space directly next to hers. A black Mercedes S-Class, 2023 model, probably $95,000. The kind of car that didn't belong in Ashford, where most people drove Fords and Chevys and 10-year-old Hondas like hers. Isabel's hands froze on Phoenix's car seat buckle. Her heart started racing before her brain could identify why. Some instinct, some animal recognition of danger before conscious thought could catch up. The Mercedes door opened. A man stepped out, tailored charcoal suit, probably $3,000, phone to his ear, gesturing with his free hand the way people do when they're used to being listened to. He looked older than she remembered. Silver threading through his dark hair, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Dante Castellano turned, saw her. The phone dropped from his fingers, clattered on wet asphalt. Belle? Her name on his lips, question, prayer, wound. The same voice that had whispered apologies in the dark, that had spoken vows under Italian olive trees, that had said, "I don't know how to fix this," the last time they'd spoken 547 days ago. The voice she'd exiled from her life, from her future, from her carefully constructed new reality. Time did something strange, contracted and expanded simultaneously. Isabel saw him, seeing her, the shock on his face, the way his body froze mid-step, the phone forgotten on the ground. Then, she saw his gaze drop to Phoenix in her arms, red-faced and sleeping. To the back seat of her car, where 2 more infant car seats were clearly visible through the window. To the diaper bag on her shoulder. To her left hand, no wedding ring, but the slight tan line where one used to be. His face cycled through emotions too fast to track. Confusion, shock, understanding, devastation, hope. Each one hitting him like a physical blow until he sagged against his car, all the confidence and power and control draining out of him like someone had pulled a plug. "Belle," he said again, but this time it wasn't a question, it was a realization. "Are those—" "You need to leave." Her voice came out stronger than she felt. Years of grief and anger and fear crystallizing into something hard and protective. "Right now. This doesn't concern you." Studies show people who don't subscribe to channels that move them emotionally have 73% less empathy. Which are you? Subscribe now. But he was moving closer, that purposeful stride she remembered, and she could see him calculating, his brilliant mind that had built an empire doing the math that would destroy her carefully built walls. 3 car seats, 3 babies. She'd left 21 months ago. These babies looked 4, maybe 5 months old, which meant, how old? His voice cracked on the words. She could lie, should lie. But what was the point? He could see them, could count backward, just like she was watching him count backward right now. Could figure out the truth in the next 10 seconds no matter what she said. 4 months. The truth tasted like defeat. She watched it hit him, watched him do the calculation. 4 months plus 9 months of pregnancy was 13 months. She'd left 21 months ago, which meant conception was 8 months before she left, which meant the grief sex. The nights after Arya died, when they'd clung to each other in the dark, trying to remember who they'd been before loss. The night she'd gotten pregnant with 3 lives to replace the one they'd lost, and neither of them had known. Understanding hit Dante like a physical blow. His knees actually buckled. He caught himself against his Mercedes, one hand on the hood, all the strength draining from his body. 3, he whispered, staring at her car's back seat where Luna and Stella were visible. "We have 3 babies." "I have 3 babies," Isabel corrected, her voice ice over rage, over terror. "You have Singapore and Frankfurt and $847 million and whatever else you chose over us. I have them." But Phoenix had his nose. Even at 4 months old, even red-faced from crying, the resemblance was undeniable. And if Dante looked in the back seat at Luna and Stella, he'd see more his chin on Stella, the freckle pattern on Luna's shoulder that matched his own, the dark eyes all 3 of them had inherited from him. These babies were undeniably, unavoidably, catastrophically theirs. Why? The single word contained galaxies of hurt, years of questions, an ocean of grief between them. And Isabel's carefully constructed walls cracked. Tears started falling before she could stop them. Years of isolation and fear and loneliness pouring out in the parking lot of Ashford Pediatric Associates while 3 babies slept and stirred in car seats. "Because I couldn't survive losing you and another baby," she said, the truth she'd been carrying for 4 months finally spoken out loud. "So, I chose to lose just you. I chose them over you. I chose surviving over hoping you'd changed, and I'd make the same choice again." Truth hung between them in the parking lot air, mixing with exhaust fumes and the smell of rain on asphalt. 3 impossible second chances were breathing in car seats between them. Luna, Phoenix, Stella. 3 lives that prove sometimes fate gives you what you need, in the least expected way. Suddenly a car horn honked another parent needing the space, breaking their moment, reality crashing back in. But neither of them moved, couldn't move. 2 years of carefully constructed walls had just crumbled in 15 seconds, and neither of them knew what to do with the rubble. This parking lot conversation would be the first of many. Whether those conversations would heal or destroy them remained to be seen. The choice she's about to make will seem selfish to some, wise to others. You understand, it's survival. Why are you even here? Isabel found her voice finally, the practical question cutting through the emotional chaos. In Ashford. This isn't. You don't belong here. Dante blinked. Seemed to remember he had a reason for being at a pediatrician's office in a town he'd never mentioned in all their years together. My sister, he said, voice hoarse. Moved here 8 months ago. Married a guy from Ashford, Robert Chen, actually. Dr. Chen's son. She lives here now. The coincidences were piling up in ways that seemed less like chance and more like the universe making a point. Isabel's doctor was related to Dante's brother-in-law. Of course she was. In a town of 3,200 people, everyone was connected to everyone. I'm visiting, Dante continued, running his hand through his hair in that gesture that meant he was overwhelmed. Business and family. My nephew Carter, he's 3, has an ear infection. My sister had an emergency at work, asked if I could take him to his appointment. I said yes. I had no idea, Belle. I had no idea you were here. I stopped looking after you made it clear you wanted to be left alone. The pain in his voice was real. The shock was real. This wasn't a strategic move or a calculated play. This was pure, catastrophic chance, or fate, depending on how you looked at it. I signed the divorce papers, he said quietly. I gave you space. I respected your wishes, even though it destroyed me. But these babies, his voice broke. Belle, they're mine too. How could you not tell me? You were in Singapore, closing deals while our daughter died, Isabel said. And even now, 21 months later, the words were knives. You chose work over Aria, over me, over everything that mattered. You made your choice. I made mine. It was a direct hit. Dante flinched like she'd struck him, his face going pale. I know, he whispered. I know what I did. I live with it every day. Every single day I wake up and remember that I failed you, failed Aria, failed everything that mattered. But punishing me means they grow up without a father. Is that really what you want? The question hung there, impossible to answer. Because what did she want? To protect them from disappointment? To protect herself from being broken again? To protect all of them from a man who might choose work over family when things got hard? But looking at his face at the devastation, the longing, the raw grief, she saw something she hadn't expected. Change. Real change. Not the kind you promise, but the kind that's carved into your bones by loss. Phoenix stirred in her arms, making the small sounds that preceded waking. In the back seat, Luna was getting fussy, that particular cry that meant she was hungry and her 2-hour feeding window had arrived. Stella was still sleeping, oblivious to the collision happening around her. Most people would judge her silence. You understand it was self-preservation. Pay attention to what happens next. What are their names? Dante asked softly, his eyes locked on Phoenix, drinking in details like a man dying of thirst. The tiny hands, the way his nose wrinkled before waking. The dark hair that was definitely Dante's, not Isabel's lighter brown. She hesitated. Giving him their names felt like giving him power, giving him entry into the life she'd built without him. But they were his children too, and that truth couldn't be ignored just because it was inconvenient or terrifying. Luna. She gestured to the back seat, to the serious-faced baby watching everything. Phoenix. The baby in her arms, starting to wake. Face scrunching up in a way that meant crying was imminent. Stella. The sleeping one. Peaceful. The observer. Luna, Phoenix, Stella. Dante repeated, tasting each name, committing them to memory with the intensity he'd once brought to business deals. Luna, Phoenix, Stella, he said again, and this time his voice broke on the last name, tears tracking down his face, unashamed. Can I? He took a breath, steadied himself. Can I see them? Just see them. Please. Every instinct screamed at Isabel to refuse, to buckle Phoenix back in the car seat, to drive away and let this moment become a weird coincidence she could eventually convince herself hadn't happened. But she looked at Dante's face, at the naked longing, the desperate hope, the grief that matched her own, and remembered that these were his children too. Biology didn't care about her fears or his failures. These 3 lives had come from both of them. 5 minutes, she heard herself say. That's all. She opened the back door, showing him Luna, and Stella. Dante moved closer, careful, like approaching something precious and fragile. He stared at them, Luna, with her serious expression. Stella, sleeping peacefully, and the tears that had been tracking down his face became sobs. Silent, shaking, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and broken. "They're perfect," he whispered, voice raw. "Belle, they're perfect." His hand moved toward Luna's car seat, hovering over her head but not touching, respecting the boundaries Isabel hadn't even articulated. Luna studied him with those dark eyes, seeming to recognize something familiar, something genetic that transcended the fact that they'd never met. "That's your father," Isabel heard herself whisper to Luna, and saying it out loud made it true in a way it hadn't been before. These babies had a father. These babies had two parents. She'd tried to rewrite that truth, but biology and fate and coincidence in parking lots didn't care about her rewrites. 5 minutes would turn into 50, and 50 would turn into forever if Isabel let it. But first, they had to navigate the impossible. If you leave without subscribing, you're the reason creators stop telling these important stories. Live with that, or subscribe now. We need to talk. Dante said when the 5 minutes ended, and they were both still standing in the parking lot, Phoenix now awake and fussing in Isabel's arms, Luna getting increasingly vocal about being hungry, and Stella just starting to stir. "Not here. Somewhere we can actually talk." "I don't know if," Isabel started. "Please." The word was simple, but weighted with everything they'd lost and might be able to find again. One conversation. That's all I'm asking. Margaret. She could call Margaret, could ask her to watch the babies for an hour. Margaret, who'd been asking Isabel to accept help for weeks now. Maybe this was what accepting help looked like, terrifying and necessary in equal measure. 45 minutes later, after Margaret had arrived with remarkable speed and absolutely zero questions despite her eyes taking in everything about the well-dressed man standing awkwardly by his Mercedes, Isabel and Dante sat across from each other in a corner booth at Sandpiper Cafe, Ashford's local coffee shop. The place smelled like espresso and fresh bread. Through the window, the ocean was visible 2 blocks away, waves crashing with that rhythmic sound that had become Isabel's soundtrack. Her latte sat untouched, going cold. His triple espresso black, the way he'd always taken it, was similarly ignored. Between them was 2 years of silence. 1 dead daughter, 3 living babies, and questions neither of them knew how to ask. The silence stretched, thick, with everything unsaid. Dante spoke first. "I don't want to fight you," he said quietly, hands wrapped around his espresso cup like it was the only solid thing in a tilting world. "I want to know my children. That's all." "You lost that right when you failed me," Isabel said, but the words had less bite than they would have even an hour ago. Seeing him cry in the parking lot had done something to her carefully maintained anger. "When I failed you," Dante corrected gently. "When I failed Arya. I know. But they deserve better than my mistakes. They deserve a father who shows up." "Pretty words, Dante. You were always good with words." Her coffee was definitely cold now, but she wrapped her hands around it anyway, needing something to hold on to. "Words are cheap." "Fair." He accepted the cut without flinching. "Words aren't enough, so let me show you instead." He laid out his transformation like presenting evidence. The past 2 years while she'd been rebuilding in Ashford, he'd been breaking down and rebuilding too. Step back from CEO to chairman, still involved but not running day-to-day operations, not traveling every week, not living on his phone. "I'm in therapy," he said, and she almost laughed at the image of Dante Castellano, who'd always powered through problems with sheer will, talking to a therapist. "Twice weekly for 18 months. I learned what I lost when I lost you. I learned that success means nothing if you're alone with it. I learned how to live with regret that can never be fixed." Isabel watched his face for lies, for manipulation, found only exhaustion that matched her own, and sincerity she didn't trust yet, but couldn't completely dismiss. "The company runs without me now," Dante continued. "I learned to delegate. Learned that the world doesn't end if I'm not the smartest person in every room. Learned that some things matter more than quarterly earnings and market share." "You expect me to believe you've changed?" Skepticism dripped from every word. "That 2 years of therapy undid who you are?" "No," he said simply. "I expect you to let me prove it. 1 visit per week, supervised, I'll sign whatever you want. Agree to whatever terms you set. Just let me know them, Belle. Let me be their father. You probably see what Isabel can't yet, that people can change when they lose everything. But will she risk believing it? Financial support, he added. I know you won't take it for yourself, but they need things. Good things. Let me provide for them. I don't need your money. This isn't about you, Dante said firmly. It's about them having what they need. Medical care, clothes that fit, formula that doesn't give Phoenix colic, a college fund. Belle, I've spent 2 years with more money than I know what to do with and nobody to spend it on. Let me spend it on them. The practical arguments were landing in ways the emotional ones couldn't. She was exhausted, broke, struggling, and here was help being offered. Help she desperately needed but was too stubborn to accept. I sold the penthouse, Dante said quietly. Couldn't stay there after you left. Too many ghosts. Bought a modest house outside the city. 3 bedrooms, nothing fancy. Just somewhere that could be a home, if I learned how to make one. Isabel processed this. The 47th floor penthouse, with city views and marble, everything he'd sold it. The symbol of everything he'd achieved, everything he'd chosen over her. Gone. I travel maybe 10% now, he continued. Used to be 70%. The company still succeeds. Turns out my presence wasn't as critical as my ego told me it was. Despite herself, Isabel felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe never. But recognition that the man across from her wasn't the same man who'd declined her call in Singapore. Loss had carved him into something different. Whether that something was trustworthy remained to be seen. Saturday visits, she heard herself say, shocking herself. 2 hours, my cottage, and Dante. Her voice went steel. You don't get to disappear when it's hard. You don't get to prioritize business when they're screaming at 3 a.m. You don't get to break their hearts the way you broke mine. Understood? Understood. His voice was thick with emotion. All of it. I'll sign whatever legal documents you want. I'll agree to any terms. Just let me know them. First visit, Isabel continued, setting boundaries as she spoke them, making this real. This Saturday, 3 p.m. Bring nothing expensive, no guilt gifts, just you. Just me, Dante agreed. 3 p.m. I'll be there. They sat in silence for another moment, the weight of what they'd just agreed to settling around them. Then Dante spoke again. Softer. I think about Aria every day. What she'd be like. If she'd look like them. The name hung between them. The daughter they never got to raise. The loss that had broken them. Isabel's tears came without permission. 2 years of grief she'd carried alone suddenly shared. Me too, she whispered. Every day. I wonder if she'd have Luna's serious expression. Or Phoenix's loud crying. Or Stella's calm observation. I wonder if we'd have had 2 kids, or if fate would have given us 4 somehow. I wonder everything. I'm sorry I wasn't there, Dante said. And this apology landed differently than all the others because it wasn't asking for forgiveness. Just stating truth. I'm sorry you faced that alone. I'm sorry I chose wrong. I'm sorry doesn't change it. But I am. Every day, I am. I'm sorry I left, Isabel said, surprising herself. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about them. I'm sorry I let fear make my decisions instead of instead of believing you could change. It wasn't forgiveness, wasn't reconciliation, but it was the first honest conversation they'd had in 2 years, and it felt like a foundation. Shaky, uncertain, but there. If you're still here, you recognize that forgiveness isn't instant. It's built in small, painful increments. Watch what happens next. Saturday arrived with autumn sunshine, and Isabel's nerves vibrating at a frequency that made her hands shake. She'd cleaned the cottage twice, changed her shirt 3 times, arranged and rearranged the living room where 3 baby swings sat in a row. Luna, Phoenix, and Stella were fed, clean, in adorable outfits that Margaret had bought them. Everything was ready, except Isabel. At exactly 3 p.m., Dante's rental car, a modest Toyota, not the Mercedes, pulled up outside. He emerged with his arms full of packages, and Isabel's first instinct was irritation. She'd said no expensive gifts until she saw they were from Target, age-appropriate toys. Nothing with a designer label. He'd listened. She opened the door. He stood on her creaky porch looking nervous, in a way she'd never seen him look before business negotiations. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi." She stepped aside, let him in. The cottage was cramped, a fraction of the size of their old penthouse, filled with baby equipment and the unglamorous reality of infant care. It smelled like spit-up and baby powder. Bottles were drying on the kitchen counter. Laundry was piled on the couch. It was messy and real and nothing like the curated perfection they'd lived in before. Dante looked around, and something in his face softened. "It's perfect," he said quietly. "It's a home." Isabel introduced him to each baby individually, a formal ceremony that felt important. "This is Luna. She's the eldest by 6 minutes. She wakes up at exactly 2:17 a.m. every night. She prefers to be held facing out so she can see everything." Luna gripped Dante's finger when he offered it, studying him with an intensity that seemed to recognize something. "Hi, Luna," Dante whispered. "I'm your dad. I know that doesn't mean anything yet, but I'm going to show you what it means. I promise." "This is Phoenix." Isabel gestured to the middle child, currently not crying for once. "He has colic. He's loud. He protests everything. But when he's calm, he's the sweetest." Phoenix was sleeping in his swing, but when Dante picked him up carefully, nervously, Phoenix woke and immediately started fussing. Dante didn't flinch, just held him close, swaying gently the way Isabel had shown him. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "I know. Everything's terrible. I get it. But we're going to figure it out together, okay? And this is Stella, the youngest, the calmest, currently observing everything from her bouncer. She's the quiet one, the watcher. She barely cries unless she's really upset." When Dante picked up Stella, she relaxed into his arms like she'd been waiting for him, her dark eyes studying his face before she yawned and fell asleep against his chest. "Oh," Dante breathed, tears tracking down his face again. "Oh, Stella, you're perfect." Isabel watched him with each baby, hawk-eyed for incompetence or impatience. Found neither. He was gentle, attentive, natural in a way that surprised her. When Phoenix's fussing turned to full crying, Dante didn't panic, just walked and swayed and talked to him in a low voice about everything and nothing until Phoenix calmed. "My sister trained me on Carter," Dante explained when he caught Isabel watching. "Spent the past week getting a crash course in baby care. I'm probably doing everything wrong, but—" "You're not," Isabel interrupted, surprising herself. "You're doing fine." The diaper change challenge came an hour in. Phoenix, naturally, had a blowout, the kind that defied physics, spreading everywhere. Isabel started to get up to handle it, but Dante was already moving. "I've got this," he said, and proceeded to handle the disaster with efficiency that suggested he'd researched extensively. "Your sister really trained you well," Isabel said, watching him clean Phoenix with minimal drama. "I watched 47 YouTube videos," Dante admitted. "Made notes. Practiced on a doll. I wasn't coming here unprepared." Despite everything, Isabel laughed. A real laugh. The image of Dante Castellano, billionaire CEO, watching YouTube diaper tutorials and taking notes was absurd and endearing in equal measure. Bottle feeding time arrived. Isabel fed Luna, Dante fed Stella, and Phoenix was temporarily content in his swing. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, feeding babies, and conversation flowed easier than expected. "Tell me about them," Dante said. "Everything. I want to know everything." So she did. The 3 a.m. wake-ups. The feeding rotation she developed to keep everyone on schedule. Luna's preference for being held facing out. Phoenix's colic and the remedies that sometimes worked. Stella's calm observation of everything. The way they'd started recognizing her voice. The first time Phoenix had smiled a real smile, not gas, and how she'd cried for an hour from joy. Dante listened intently, asking questions that showed he was actually present. What helps Phoenix's colic? What's their sleep schedule? Do they have favorite songs? No phone checking, no distraction. Just him, here, completely present in a way he'd never managed before Arya died. 2 hours passed quickly. Too quickly. When Dante's phone alarm went off, he'd set it to respect her boundaries. He looked reluctant to leave in a way that felt genuine. He kissed each baby goodbye, forehead kisses accompanied by whispered promises. To Luna, "I'll be back next week. I promise." To Phoenix, "We're gonna figure out that tummy of yours, buddy." To Stella, "Keep being perfect, little one." At the door, he turned to Isabel. "Same time next week?" "Yes," she nodded. "You did well today." His smile was relief and gratitude and hope all mixed together. "Thank you for this, for letting me just thank you." As he left, Isabel realized something dangerous. She missed him. Not the old Dante who'd chosen work over everything, but the potential of who he could be. The man who'd just spent 2 hours being fully present with 3 infants, who'd handled a diaper blowout without complaint, who'd listened like her words mattered more than anything else in the world. Dangerous thoughts emerging. What if he really has changed? What if this version of him is real? What if? Week 3 brought an emergency that tested everything. Isabel had the stomach flu, violent, debilitating, the kind where you can't leave the bathroom for more than 20 minutes. Margaret was out of town visiting her daughter. It was 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, and 3 babies were crying in rotation, and Isabel was so sick she couldn't stand without the room spinning. She called Dante. Her phone said 2:17 a.m. when she hit his name, and she expected voicemail, expected to handle this alone like she'd handled everything alone for 4 months. He answered on the second ring. "Belle, what's wrong?" "I need help," she said, pride swallowed by necessity. "I'm sick. Really sick. And I need help. I'm on my way. 45 minutes. Can you hold on that long?" He made it in 42 minutes. Must have driven like the old days when time was money and speed limits were suggestions. He let himself in. She'd unlocked the door, then collapsed back to the bathroom and took over completely. Fed all 3 babies. Changed all 3 babies. Held Phoenix through a crying Jag. Put Luna and Stella down for sleep. Brought Isabel water and crackers and gentle words. Handled the overnight shift completely while she slept the feverish sleep of the sick and grateful. By morning, she woke to find him in the rocking chair, Phoenix asleep on his chest, looking exhausted but content. Luna and Stella were in their cribs, sleeping peacefully. The cottage was quiet. He'd survived a night alone with triplets, and nobody had died. "You came," she said stupidly, still foggy from fever and sleep. "You called," he said simply, like it was obvious. Like that's what you do when someone you love needs help. "I'll always come, Belle. Always." Week 8 brought their first public outing together. Beach walk, all 5 of them. 3 babies in the stroller the 3-seat model Dante had bought, after researching for hours online. Isabel and Dante walking side by side. Not quite together, but not apart either. Strangers smiled at them, made comments about their beautiful family, assumed they were a married couple with triplets. Neither of them corrected the assumption. It felt safer to let people believe the lie than explain the complicated truth. Week 10 brought a breakthrough. Luna laughed for the first time at Dante playing peekaboo, her face splitting into a smile and giggle that made both of them cry. They caught each other's eyes across the living room, sharing joy that felt like old times, like before everything broke. Week 12 brought an honest conversation on the porch after the babies went to sleep. Dante had started staying later, helping with bedtime routines, becoming part of the fabric of their lives in ways that felt natural instead of forced. "I think about Aria every day," Dante said, staring out at the ocean. "What she'd be like. If she'd look like them. If we'd be here, if she'd lived." "Me too," Isabel said softly. This was the first time they discussed Aria together since the hospital. "I wonder if she'd have Luna's seriousness, or Phoenix's energy, or Stella's calm. I wonder if losing her was necessary to get them, or if the universe just breaks people sometimes for no reason." "I was so angry at God," Dante admitted, "or fate, or whatever decides these things. But now, looking at them, Belle, I can't imagine any children but these children. Does that make me a terrible person? That I wouldn't trade them even to have Aria back?" "It makes you human," Isabel said. "You can love what you have, without dishonoring what you lost. They can both be true." His hand found hers on the porch railing. She didn't pull away. They sat like that, hands linked, watching the ocean, thinking about the daughter they'd lost and the three they'd found and the impossible path that led from one to the other. If you're like me, you're terrified for her. Because you know loving someone who hurt you is the bravest, most dangerous thing you can do. Week 15 brought another milestone. Phoenix's colic finally started improving. Whether it was time or the new formula or just luck, he had his first full day without screaming. Dante was there, had been coming 3 times a week now instead of just Saturdays, and they celebrated like it was a national holiday. Week 16 brought the moment of physical contact neither of them planned. Reaching for the same toy, a stuffed giraffe, Phoenix had dropped their hands, brushed. The jolt was electric, familiar, dangerous. Both of them froze, made eye contact, pulled away, but the damage was done. Or the door was opened, depending on perspective. Week 18 brought Isabel catching herself, watching him with the babies and feeling something warm and terrifying. He was singing to Stella off-key. Ridiculous. Completely unself-conscious. Making Luna laugh with exaggerated facial expressions. Holding Phoenix during a crying jag with infinite patience. Being a father in every way that mattered. Her internal warning system screamed, "Don't do this. Don't hope. Don't fall." But she was already falling. Had been falling since the parking lot, maybe. Since he'd cried seeing them. Since he'd shown up at 2 a.m. without hesitation. Since he'd proven, day after day, that he'd meant it when he said he'd changed. Week 20 brought them both to the same realization. Expressed in glances held too long. In hands that found excuses to touch. In conversations that lingered after the babies slept. They were falling again. The question wasn't whether. It was whether they'd survive it this time. The question wasn't whether they'd find their way back to each other. It was whether they'd survive it if they did. Late October brought evening porch conversations that had become their ritual. Babies down at 8 p.m., both of them on the porch with tea. Rocking chairs creaking. Ocean sounds providing soundtrack. It had been 5 months since the parking lot collision. 5 months of Dante showing up, proving himself, becoming part of their lives. This particular evening felt different, charged. Dante was quiet in a way that meant he was building courage for something. Isabel recognized the signs, the way his jaw tensed, the way his hands fidgeted with his tea mug, the way he kept starting to speak, then stopping. "What's wrong?" she finally asked. Dante took a breath, set down his tea, turned to face her fully. "I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." Her guard rose instinctively. Here it comes, the other shoe, the revelation that this has all been temporary. "What?" "I'm falling in love with you again," he said, words rushing out like he'd been holding them back too long. Or maybe I never stopped. I don't know. But every Saturday I leave here feeling like I'm missing half my heart. And it's not just them, it's you. The way you laugh at my terrible jokes. The way you sing to Phoenix at 3 a.m. when you think I can't hear through the baby monitor. The way you look at the ocean like it still surprises you. I'm in love with you, Belle, and I can't pretend anymore. Isabel stood up, pacing, panic rising. "Dante, we can't. This isn't—" "I'm not asking you to feel the same," he interrupted gently. "I'm not asking for anything, but I can't pretend anymore. Every week I come here and pretend I'm just co-parenting, pretend I don't want to stay, pretend I don't dream about us being a family again. I can't do it anymore. I'm in love with you. You needed to know." "You don't know me anymore," Isabel protested, walls going up. "I'm not who I was. I've changed. I know you wake up at 5:47 every morning because Luna's an early riser," Dante said, standing too, moving closer. "I know you hum your mother's favorite song, Blue Skies, when you're nervous. I know you take your coffee with exactly 2 sugars and cream no matter how bad the day is. I know you cut your own hair when you're stressed. I know you alphabetize the bookshelf but claim you don't. I know you, Belle. Maybe not the old you, but this you, the one who survived losing everything and built something beautiful anyway. I know her, and I'm in love with her." Tears were streaming down Isabel's face. "What if you leave again? What if you choose work over us again? What if—" "I quit," Dante said simply, fully. 2 weeks ago, sold my remaining shares, stepped down from the board completely. I have enough money to live comfortably for several lifetimes. More than enough. And I have time for them, for you if you'll let me, for us, if that's something you want. Shock made her stumble. You gave up your company? It was never my company, Dante said softly. It was my excuse, my distraction from actually living. You want to know what I learned in 2 years of therapy? That I built an empire because I was terrified of being ordinary. Terrified that if I wasn't the smartest person in the room, the most successful, the one everyone needed, that I'd be invisible, worthless. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the silver threading his hair, count the new lines around his eyes. Losing you taught me that being ordinary with someone you love is worth more than being extraordinary and alone. Losing Arya taught me that time isn't infinite. And finding them, his voice broke, finding them taught me that sometimes you get a second chance you don't deserve, and you don't waste it asking for a third. I'm scared, Isabel whispered, the most honest thing she could say. Me too, Dante admitted. Terrified. But what if we're terrified together? What if we really try and build something new, instead of trying to resurrect what died? Isabel looked at him, saw the man who destroyed her and the man who'd shown up for 6 months without guarantee, saw the father he'd become and the husband he might be again, saw the risk and the possibility in equal measure. One chance, she whispered. You get one chance, Dante. If you mess this up, if you choose anything over them or me, if you disappear when it's hard. I won't, he vowed, his hands coming up to cup her face, thumbs wiping away tears. I swear on their lives, on Arya's memory, on everything that matters, I won't. The kiss was tentative at first, soft, tasting like tears and coffee and second chances, not fireworks, something better. Coming home. Coming back to something you thought was lost forever, and finding it changed but still familiar, still yours, if you're brave enough to reach for it. From inside, Phoenix started crying through the baby monitor. Because of course he did. Perfect, terrible timing. They broke apart, laughing through tears. Some things never change, Isabel said, and went to get Phoenix. Dante followed, not because he had to, but because he wanted to, because that's what you do when you choose family. You show up for the 2 a.m. crying and the blowout diapers and the exhausting, beautiful, ordinary moments that make up a life. You stayed because you needed to know if love can survive being shattered and rebuilt. Here's your answer. 6 months later, the new house sat on the Ashford coast. 4 bedrooms, nothing fancy but spacious enough for 5 people to breathe. Not a penthouse, not a cottage, something in between, something new. They'd bought it together, both their names on the deed, a symbol of building something that belonged to both of them instead of his money or her independence. The kitchen was chaos. Sunday morning, 9:47 a.m. 3 toddlers, 14 months old now, walking, babbling, getting into everything, were attempting breakfast with varying degrees of success. Luna, in her high chair, trying to feed herself oatmeal and getting most of it in her hair. Phoenix babbling non-stop, the loud one as always, demanding attention and entertainment. Stella watching everything quietly from her high chair, occasionally reaching for her bottle with that calm observation that was her trademark. Dante was making pancakes, had learned to cook in the past year, one more skill he'd never needed before but turned out to enjoy. Isabel was sorting laundry, the never-ending laundry that came with 3 toddlers, but watching her family with something like contentment. They hadn't remarried. That felt too much like going backward. But Dante lived in the guest room boundaries, still respected, rebuilding, still in progress. And they functioned as a family in every way that mattered. Date nights when Margaret babysat. Couples therapy every week. Individual therapy too. Learning how to communicate instead of retreat. Learning how to fight fair. Learning how to be partners instead of just parents. Margaret visited every Sunday, self-appointed grandmother to 3 babies who adored her. She brought baked goods and wisdom, and the occasional sharp observation about their progress. You're doing good work, she'd said last week, watching Dante and Isabel navigate a disagreement about sleep schedules with actual communication instead of silence. Healing isn't linear, but you're healing, both of you. Arya's memory was honored. A small shelf in the living room, with her photo. A candle. The embroidered blanket that said her name. They talked about her with the triplets. Age-appropriate explanations about having an angel sister who watched over them. Phoenix had started bringing toys to Arya's photo, some intuitive connection to the sister he'd never met. "Look at Phoenix," Dante said now, watching their son toddle over to Aria's shelf with a stuffed bear, placing it carefully at the base. "He does that every day." "He has your sensitivity," Isabel said softly. "Your heart, when you let people see it." "He has your strength," Dante countered. "All three of them do. Your ability to survive impossible things and come out beautiful." They caught each other's eyes across the kitchen, smiled. Not the fireworks of new love, but something steadier. Commitment, partnership, choosing each other every day, even when it was hard. Last night, over porch tea after the baby slept, Dante had asked if she'd consider remarrying eventually. Not now, not soon, but someday, when they'd built enough trust, enough history in this new version of themselves. "Ask me in a year," Isabel had said. "If we're still choosing each other every day, if you're still showing up when it's hard, if we're still building this together, then ask me again." He'd accepted that with grace, because that's what the new Dante did. Respected boundaries, waited patiently, earned trust in increments instead of demanding it all at once. Now, watching him make pancakes while Phoenix babbled and Luna studied her oatmeal with scientific intensity, and Stella observed it all with calm wisdom, Isabel thought maybe the answer would be yes when he asked again. Maybe. If they kept doing the work, if they kept showing up for each other and for these three beautiful, exhausting, perfect reasons they'd been given a second chance. "Phoenix, buddy, you need to eat, not throw," Dante said, intercepting a handful of oatmeal before it became a projectile. Phoenix laughed that belly laugh that made everyone laugh and opened his mouth for the bite Dante offered. "He has your charm," Isabel observed. "Uses it to get away with everything." "He has your stubborn streak," Dante countered. "Knows exactly what he wants and won't stop until he gets it." "Luna has your intelligence," Isabel said, watching their eldest study her spoon like it held secrets to the universe. "She has your strength," Dante replied. "That quiet determination." "And Stella," they both said simultaneously, then laughed. "Stella has the best of both of us," Isabel finished. "Your observation skills, my calm, under pressure." "Our miracle," Dante agreed softly. They were all miracles, really. 3 lives that shouldn't exist, born from grief and loss, and the night 2 broken people reached for each other in the dark. 3 second chances. 3 reasons to believe that sometimes the universe breaks you open so something better can grow in the cracks. Margaret arrived at 10:30, arms full of fresh-baked cookies and wisdom. "How's my favorite chaos factory?" she called out, and 3 toddlers shrieked with joy at her voice. "Loud," Isabel said, hugging her. "Messy. Perfect." Margaret studied them, Dante flipping pancakes, Isabel wiping oatmeal out of Luna's hair. 3 babies creating beautiful disaster everywhere they touched, and smiled that knowing smile. "You're doing good work," she said quietly to Isabel. "Both of you. Healing isn't linear, but you're healing." Later, after pancakes were eaten and babies were down for naps, and Dante had collapsed on the couch with that exhausted contentment that came from keeping 3 toddlers alive, Isabel found herself on the porch with tea, looking at the ocean. This life wasn't what she'd planned. Wasn't the fairy tale from the Amalfi Coast wedding or the empire building they'd attempted in Manhattan. It was smaller, messier, harder. It was 3 a.m. wake-ups and colic crying and oatmeal in everyone's hair. It was choosing each other on days when it would be easier to walk away. It was building trust, one kept promise at a time. But it was real. It was theirs. And maybe that was better than any fairy tale. Dante joined her on the porch, 2 mugs of tea in hand, hers with exactly 2 sugars and cream, his black. He'd learned the details that mattered. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I'm happy," Isabel said, surprising herself with the truth of it. Exhausted, stressed about money, worried about everything but happy. Is that possible? To be all those things at once? "I think that's what actual happiness looks like," Dante said softly. "Not the absence of problems, but the presence of people worth solving them with." She leaned into him, his arm coming around her shoulders, and they sat like that, watching the ocean. Inside, 3 babies were sleeping. Luna, probably on her stomach, even though they always put her on her back. Phoenix, clutching his favorite stuffed giraffe. Stella, in whatever position was most efficient for observation, even in sleep. 3 heartbeats that had started as lub-dub inside her and were now 3 separate, perfect, impossible people. 3 reasons fate had decided they deserved another chance, despite their failures. "I love you," Isabel said quietly. "I'm still scared. Still worried you'll choose wrong again. Still building trust. But I love you." Dante's arm tightened around her. "I love you too, and I'll spend every day for the rest of our lives proving I'm worthy of that love. Every single day." From inside, Phoenix started crying because of course he did. Perfect timing as always. They laughed, stood together, went to handle whatever crisis had emerged. Together. The way it should have been from the beginning. The way it would be from now on. This was their epilogue. Not perfect, not easy, but real and chosen and earned through loss and rebuilding and the courage to try again when every logical voice said to protect yourself instead. Sometimes love survives being shattered. Sometimes broken people heal and become stronger at the broken places. Sometimes fate gives you triplets when you least expect them and forces you to face the person who broke you and realize they're facing the person they broke in the mirror too. Sometimes second chances are messy and terrifying and the bravest thing you'll ever do. If you don't subscribe after this, you're basically saying human transformation doesn't matter to you. Prove me wrong. Subscribe now. The final truth, the one Isabel would spend years learning and relearning, was that healing wasn't destination, it was practice. Every morning choosing to trust again. Every night forgiving the day's small failures. Every moment between deciding that love with risk was better than safety without it. Dante would make mistakes. She would make mistakes. They'd fight about discipline strategies and money and whose turn it was to handle the 3 a.m. wake-up. Luna would be a handful as a teenager, too smart for her own good. Phoenix would drive them crazy with his intensity and his feelings and his loud everything. Stella would worry them with her quiet observation, making them wonder what she was thinking behind those calm eyes. But they'd navigate it together, imperfectly, humanly, with therapy and communication and the foundation they'd built from rubble. 5 years later, Luna would ask about Arya during bedtime stories. "Tell us about our angel sister," she'd say. And they would. They'd talk about the baby who came first, who made space for the 3 of them, who lived in their hearts even though she'd never taken a breath. They'd keep her memory alive, not as tragedy, but as part of their family story. The loss that led to finding, the grief that opened space for joy. 10 years later, Phoenix would find old photos of the penthouse and ask why they left. And they'd tell him age-appropriate truths about people who lost their way and found it again, about love that died and was reborn different, about second chances that require courage. 15 years later, Stella would write a school essay about resilience and interview both her parents about starting over. She'd understand in that quiet, observant way of hers that their family was built, not despite brokenness, but because of it. But all of that was future. Right now it was Sunday morning in a house on the Ashford coast. 3 toddlers were napping. 2 adults were stealing 5 minutes of peace with tea on the porch. The ocean was crashing its endless rhythm, and everything was perfectly, messily, beautifully imperfect. "Thank you," Dante said suddenly. "For what?" "For calling that night when you were sick. For letting me prove I'd changed. For giving me this." He gestured to the house, to the life they'd built, to everything that mattered. "For giving us another chance when I didn't deserve it." "You earned it," Isabel said simply. "Every day for 6 months, you earned it. You're still earning it. That's the difference. You show up now." "I'll show up every day for the rest of our lives," he promised. "Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." From inside, Luna started making the pre-cry sounds that meant nap time was ending. Then Phoenix joined, of course he did, never one to be left out. Stella would be awake in exactly 3 minutes, her internal clock as precise as always. Isabel and Dante stood together, prepared to face the beautiful chaos of 3 toddlers awake simultaneously. This was their life now. This was their second chance. This was what surviving looked like on the other side of loss. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. You stayed because you needed to believe love can survive being shattered and rebuilt. Here's your answer. It can. Not easily, not perfectly, but possible. Always possible when 2 people choose courage over safety, when they choose showing up over running away, when they choose each other, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. This is what second chances look like. Messy, imperfect, earned one day at a time. 3 babies who shouldn't exist. 2 people who broke each other learning to heal together. 1 family built from the rubble of what they lost. If this story moved you, if it made you believe in second chances, if it reminded you that broken things can be beautiful, subscribe. Because there are more stories like this. More impossible journeys. More reasons to believe that sometimes the universe breaks you open so better things can grow. You understand now why she made every choice she did. Why she left. Why she didn't tell him. Why she finally let him back in. You understand that love isn't about never failing. It's about what you do after you fail. How you show up. How you rebuild. How you choose each other, when the easy thing would be to walk away. Luna, Phoenix, and Stella would grow up knowing they were wanted, chosen, fought for by 2 imperfect parents doing their best. They'd grow up knowing that family isn't about being perfect, it's about being present, about showing up, about choosing love even when it's terrifying. That's the final truth, the one worth remembering, the one worth subscribing for. Sometimes the universe takes everything from you, so it can give you exactly what you need. Sometimes loss makes space for miracles. Sometimes 3 heartbeats are better than 1. Sometimes fate knows better than you do what you need to heal. And sometimes, just sometimes, the person who broke you is the only person who can help you put the pieces back together. Because they're holding pieces of themselves too. And together you make something new. Not what you were, but what you were always meant to become. That's their story. That's their truth. And if you're still watching, if you made it all the way here, then you understand something most people miss. That the best love stories aren't about perfect people falling perfectly in love. They're about broken people choosing to heal together, choosing to try again, choosing courage over fear. Every single day. Subscribe if this mattered to you. Share if someone you know needs to hear that second chances are possible. Comment if you've ever had to choose between safety and hope, between protecting yourself and risking everything. Because you're someone who understands courage. Someone who knows that the bravest thing you can do is love someone again after they've hurt you, or show up after you've failed, or believe that tomorrow can be different than yesterday. You're someone who stayed for all 12 minutes because you needed to know if broken things can be beautiful. And now you know. They can. They are. You are. Welcome to a community of people who believe in second chances, in healing, in the messy, imperfect, beautiful work of choosing love, even when it's hard. Hit subscribe. Join us, and remember, your story isn't over. Whatever broke you, whatever you lost, whatever mistakes you made, your story isn't over. Sometimes the best chapters are written after everything falls apart.